I thought it might be interesting for everyone to see what I'm using for product line. As a rust encapsulator and a prepping agent, I'm using some Eastwood supplies here. This will give us a nice matte black finish. To remove the rust, I'm using a Harbor Freight Drill Master angle grinder with a carbide rust removing polycarbide abrasive wheel, that is. This setup was pretty inexpensive. I think I paid less than $40 for the combination. I'm using this carbide wheel with a drill so that I can get into the sensitive areas because of the high speed of this. You can't really control how much you remove, so you want to be careful with this. And I'm using a low speed drill to work around these sensitive areas. I'm also using, where applicable, either a steel or a brass brush to remove the rust, and a die grinder. I think this is what this is called, with a paint removing abrasive wheel here. So the combination of those two, or the combination of all of this right here, has been very beneficial, and it has been a positive experience for removing the rust. I did know that when you're working with different metals that you can have different results as far as these wheels go. These two wheels, because you're spinning at a higher RPM, have the ability to remove more than maybe you desire, specifically speaking to aluminum. So if you use this setup with aluminum, you end up pretty much shaving down a lot of aluminum, which is not really what you want to do. You really just want to focus on the rust. So that's where this comes into play. I've been using this more so on steel areas because it seems to remove the rust in a pretty quick fashion, gives it a nice finish, but you're also not jeopardizing the integrity of the metal. This is what I've been using on aluminum for the most part, or this, steel or brass. And then likewise, I've been using this in the small areas, a combination of these. And then when necessary, I've been using just sandpaper, about 800 grit sandpaper or 400 grit sandpaper. So maybe that'll give you guys a perspective on the rust removing process. Obviously you use this to prep your area, and then this to give it the final finish. Make sure that you allow this to dry and follow the directions, because this will remove this if you're not careful, and likewise it'll prevent adhesion. Well, as you can see here, we've got the new bumper support bracket installed. Additionally, I have taken black paint and have painted the upper areas where there was rust, as well as some of the lower areas. So this is pretty much the finished product here. Do have to tidy up a couple more things on the rear end, and then the bumper will go back in place, then the tail lights. But we're actually looking pretty good. So I thought I would show you the underneath of the CL. As you can see, there's significant rusting and pitting going on the backside of the spindle in the rear. This is pretty much representative of most of the car when you actually get underneath it. There is still some paint right here, but most of it is just chipping and flaking away. So what we want to do is grind down this, pitting. We're not going to replace the spindle itself. They're pretty hard to come by in good condition, so that's a bit of a gamble. Really what the course of action is going to be is using the various methods that I talked about in the beginning of the video, and then approaching this with a rust concealing paint to prevent further deterioration of this area. This right here is the back of the dust shield. This is going to be replaced with factory OEM. And likewise, there'll be some freshening up of the general area around it, the control arms. So as you can see here, we've got the rear hub assembly taken apart on the back end of the CL here. It kind of really showcases the rust buildup on here. If you take a look at this, this is the brake dust shield, and it's pretty much well nacquered. There's a lot of holes here, there's a lot of rust here. I mean, possibly this is still salvageable, but it's become pretty fatigued from the rust. And it really was inhibiting getting to the actual spindle for the rear so that we could start to grind away a lot of that rust and then come back through with paint. So if you take a look at the old and the new, you can see this one's well past its prime, so to speak, and here's our fresh new one. So now we're going to install this on the car. We're going to clean it up, and then we're going to install this on the car. This is just kind of here for mock-up reference, but there's a little bit of work that has to be done before we can actually get to that point. I think really what we're going to focus on is removing the spindle and then pulling that, getting it wire wheeled down so you get a real nice clean surface. If we can do that, then we'll be in good shape. We'll start to take apart some of the control arms, the radius arms here, which then will give us a really good, a really good section of the car completed and already ready to paint. Okay, so we've got the rear hub assembly back together for the most part. What I did was I took a grinding wheel and grinded the spindle down. I took a lot of rust, as you can see. There's a ton of rust down there. Then I put the new backing plate on, and now I put the wheel bearing back on. So I need to button up some things. I need to also do some work with painting, which I'm going to hopefully address all at once. But here's essentially what the finished product looks like. We got the backing plate on. Parking brake, I'm going to put new hardware on there because all of that was pretty much rusted and shot. So then it'll be all back together looking fresh, which is exactly what we're aiming for. Okay, here's the control arms and radius arms for the spindle. You can see the kind of before and after here. There's a little bit of rust on this control arm, and then there was a whole ton of rust over in this area that has since been cleaned up and repainted. And you can see the new dust shield for the back on this wheel. This is pretty much ready to get tidied up, and then the wheel go back on and start working on the other side. Progress is going good. All right, now focusing on the back side of the car, driver's side, you can see that we have removed most of the rust and have painted it. There are still going to be areas of rust that we won't be painting. That is due to the bushings. So we're really just focusing on the radius arms and the spindle here. And you can see that there's a new dust shield installed. I have the new brake shoes installed for the parking brake. And now the rear assembly is pretty much complete and ready to put the wheel back on. We will address this radius arm when we go underneath. I want to make sure that the parking brake is well attached and that I can able to test it. And if I painted it now, that wouldn't occur or wouldn't have that ability because I'd have to wait for it to dry. So this is what the other side looks like after some of the work has been done. I haven't actually taken care of the back side yet, so I'm working from the outside in, because most of the time is going to be spent underneath trying to get that rust down to a paintable surface. As you can see, some of the areas that I was able to paint, because I was able to get some of the rust off. This arm, for example, was taken down completely just as a test. And was repainted. So some of this might get a second coat as well. That's important to note. But this is kind of what we're gonna go for as a finished product. Obviously this area right here, which isn't painted, is not what I'm talking about. It's more like this black area that has been painted. And if you look up, this control arm up here is really this one right there. Is what I'm talking about. That one is pretty much a complete product. There's a little bit of work to be done on the driver's side, but we have the dust shield on at this point and ready to tackle the passenger side and then paint underneath. Kind of taking the approach of get one side done, paint that outside area as best I can, and then go to the other side, and then underneath would be the third and final step. As you can see, there's rust pretty much everywhere underneath. So it's really about managing the rust at this point. Getting to a showroom condition is not in the scope. It would require too much significant work for that to happen. But what we can do is prevent further rust and come out with a pretty good finished product. So the next couple videos will probably be me doing that and kind of showing you the approaches and the techniques that I'm taking.